Cool. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the Matariki Just Past Mid-Year Get Together. We have three talks lined up for today. The first one would be Pera Barrett, then we have Diana, and then finally we have CD. We'll start off with Pera first, and Pera will be speaking on purpose and priority. Um, yeah, it will all be about prioritizing your purpose and making the most of your limited time on Earth. A little bit about Pera. He's a family man, rap singer, novel writer, Wellington and Christchurch Shoebox Christmas organizer, a podcast host, and a director for New Zealander of the Year Award winner 2019. And during the day, he's a PO product owner for BNZ. With that being said, over to you, Pera, but please ensure that your talk is time boxed to 25 minutes, including Q&A, and that goes for the other two speakers as well. Over to you, Pera.
Kia ora, Tejas. I'll just put on my stopwatch. Good reminder. Timer. Cool. Kia ora koutou. Ngā mihi o te pō. Kia koutou. No ōtaki ahau ko Ngāti Raukawa ki te tonga, ko Te Atiawa ki whakarongotai, ko Ngāti Tōrangatira ngā iwi, ko Peter Barrett tōku ingoa. Hello everybody, my name is Peter Barrett, I'm from Ōtaki. My iwi are Ngāti Toa, Te Atiawa and Ngāti Raukawa. So that's kind of who I am, and in Te Ao Māori, in the Māori world, that's all very much based on where you're from and who you're from, and so that's kind of who that is. I'm just going to share my screen as well, and then I'll get into, I guess, why I'm here and what I'm here to talk about. I'm stuck on the advanced screen sharing, which we found out I'm not really advanced enough to do. Cool. Right. So I'm here today to talk a bit about what I do, and of all of those things that I spend time on, or that I consider myself, the most important of those is somebody who loves the life that he lives. So, I really enjoy my life. I love the life that I have, and the life that we have. Just like the life that you have is really just a collection of days, and those days are just a collection of hours. We all get 24. We all kind of sleep for about between 7 and 9, I guess. I spend about 16 of them awake, and how I spend those 16 hours, I guess, is therefore how I go about loving my life. Sorry. So some of the things I do in those 16 hours, it's a bit of a sort of shambolic list, but I rap, I write stories, I'm a father to a beautiful little 2-year-old and a beautiful little 5-year-old. I run a podcast called Paperback Gorillas. I run a charity project a couple of charity projects called Shoebox Christmas and Stationery Starter Packs. I'm learning Te Reo Māori full-time at the moment, and I'm on a couple of boards and a couple of companies as a consultant and director, and then I work at BNZ as a digital product owner from 9 to 5. So I'm kind of going to talk about those things that I do and how they create this life that I love. It's not a self-help talk. It's very much a ramble and an analysis, I guess a rambling analysis of how I have come to the point of loving my life. And I guess I'm giving it in the hope that it's useful to somebody else, and if it's not, then get to play. You can have a little nap, and Diana and CD's talk will be up soon, and you might get more out of that. But I'll start at the beginning of my life, I guess. Like I said, it's quite rambly, so bear with me. But the year before I was born, my parents buried my 2 sisters, Irina and Tina. So they were 6 and 8 years old, and they drowned out in the water off Kapiti Island. So I kind of grew up in this house with their memories and their photos around me the whole time, and we spend every Christmas, like we still do now, down at the Urupa. So that's our family cemetery down in Waikanae, where we turn up with Huhana. That's Huhana a couple of years ago. We get her dressed ready and get her looking pretty and tidied up. And then we go there and do the same with my little big sister's gravestones. So we tidy them up. We put put new fresh flowers at the headstones, and mum and dad tell them that they love them, and we have our whānau time there every Christmas. And I start off with that because I guess I've always known that life was fragile, and that being here and having a life is a lucky break. So growing up around that loss was quite a constant reminder that what I had, I was lucky for, and that I should be grateful for it and appreciate it. And we kind of all know that, I think, in theory. That's pretty well understood, that life starts and then it ends. But it's quite a hard thing to remember and to act on. Like, we kind of know that, but we don't necessarily always act on it. And when I was growing up in Otaki, I was also kind of, Otaki is a very Māori town. It's where Te Rauparaha built his famous Rangiatia church. It's been a very active Te Reo Māori revitalisation centre for a lot of years, for a long time. So I kind of grew up around a lot of the problems that are particular to Māori especially. So, we're 15% of the population but make up 50% of the jails. We Māori men have the highest, are the most likely group to commit suicide on earth at the moment. And so I grew up around these problems, and I saw them and felt them quite closely. When I moved down to Wellington to go to uni, to go to Victoria, every uni holidays I would come back, and there was a certain percentage of my mates, there would always be one of them or two of them that were in jail. And that was just normal. It was kind of like, where's so-and-so? Oh, he's in jail. Where's so-and-so? He's in jail. And jail should never be normal, right? But for a section of society, it unfortunately is. And so I kind of grew up with this, that's a slide that I should have gone to before, but that's just a little bit about equality and equity, and just kind of highlighting the fact that there's this problem that most of us know about, that people in low socioeconomic situations especially face challenges that many of them can't overcome on their own. And when it comes to those socioeconomic indicators, Māori perform a lot worse than non-Māori. So that's the things like, $10,000 or less as your personal income, having access to a vehicle, rental, renting and having an overcrowded home. A lot of those socioeconomic indicators, Māori perform worse than non-Māori. And like I said, I kind of saw those problems up close, and that the challenges that a lot of people I care about weren't able to overcome on their own. And so that's a problem that I knew, and I kind of grew up around that. That doesn't explain why I love the life that I live, though. And like I said, this is a little bit rambly, but I'll get to where I'm going with this. So 22 years after my parents buried my two little big sisters, I was in a head-on crash at 100 k's on the highway. I was in a coma for 3 days, and I lived in a wheelchair and hospital bed for the next 4 months. Suffered a lot of injuries, snapped my femur, smashed up my head, and had serious head trauma. While I was in hospital, the police arrived and told me that the woman driving the car that I had crashed into had passed away, and that I was being charged with taking her life. And there's probably not enough time in this corridor to go into the full kind of depths of that impact, but suffice to say, I was physically broken, literally kind of smashed. But then I had these emotional and this mental injury and shock and trauma to try to figure out as well. And I remember my dad telling me when I was at college and kind of in line to get a hiding from one of the bigger kids at school that, physical injuries will come and go, and they not to worry about them. It's the mental injuries or the mental hurt that you need to look out for. And, this is from a man born in the 40s, right? Like, that was quite emotional and quite deep for him at the time to tell me. And he was right. Like, the survivor's guilt and the killer's guilt that I carried with me and still carry with me as a result of that were much worse than the physical injuries. And I guess over the kind of first few years, especially as the weight of those injuries and that trauma kind of settled in and really started to make themselves known, I realized I needed to be really proactive at managing them and making sure that I enjoyed the life that I had, that I balanced out that pain and that trauma, or it would do me really serious harm. I remember Dad sitting beside me on the hospital bed and telling me, "Don't let this be something that takes your life as well." And this was coming from the man who had buried his daughters, buried his beautiful little girls, and lived through it and survived that. So he had kind of shown me that it was possible to survive that, and it was possible to deal with that degree of hurt. I mean, his pain and his suffering is a million times, like that's every parent's worst nightmare, right? That's I kind of could imagine what that was like growing up, but now having a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old of my own, like I can kind of only just a little bit more start to imagine it, what it would have been like for him. So I kind of got to this point after the car accident of realizing that I am lucky to still be here, like I was born knowing, growing up in that house around the loss of my sisters, but really kind of understanding that problem a lot more and knowing that problem a lot more than I had before. I realized that I needed to act as if I was lucky to have my life if I wanted to balance out the pain and hurt that I was carrying now. And I needed to be able to ask myself if Lorna, that's the name of the woman who I killed, if Lorna could see me now, what would she say? How would she respond to me carrying on my life and not appreciating it, knowing that she no longer has hers? So I have these two problems now that I kind of think of these as the two problems that I carry with me for my life that I want to try and address, and that's kind of what I spend my time doing. The first one being, people in low socioeconomic situations face challenges that many of them can't overcome on their own. And the other one is that I need to proactively work on my happiness and love my life. In 2014, I started a project called Shoebox Christmas, and last year we delivered 5,400 gifts to children in low socioeconomic situations, children who face a whole lot of challenges that other children, their own peers, don't face, and they face them alone a lot of the time. Them and their whānau face them alone. But I didn't start with a roadmap to getting to deliver those 5,400 gifts, or to even or to expanding the project in any way. I started just with that problem that I knew, the problem of the challenges that those children were facing, and the belief that every positive experience that those children get influences them and makes them more likely to make a positive decision of their own later on. And that purpose moved me to try and solve that problem. The purpose of trying to address that challenge that they have, that they're trying to overcome on their own, that moved me to try and do something, and that something was Shoebox Christmas. I never, I didn't know how to go about setting up a social project. I didn't know what would be involved. And when I started trying to do that mahi, what I realized was I really loved the process of setting up that social project, of trying to expand it, of trying to tell the story of why this problem needed to be addressed and why we should do it. And because I really enjoyed that process, the feedback loop of going through that activity is what kind of made me prioritize the time to do it, and give that attempt, because all I was doing was trying to address that problem. By finding that I loved the process, it made me spend more time doing it, and made me get closer to the point of, I'll never solve that problem, obviously, but it made me carry on the momentum of trying to address it. In 2014, I drew a random picture for my daughter, for Huana, and it was of an old man writing down his dreams, and I thought that would be a cool story to tell my daughter. And then I thought, like, what would I be telling her if I published that story? My daughter is just like me. She'll grow up facing the same challenges that we've just talked about today. All of those higher likelihoods and higher propensity to face challenges that will stop her, will make it harder for her to love her life. If I was to publish that story, I'd be telling her that she could be whatever she wants to be. So that purpose moved me to try. So I sat down and I tried to write a story, and I hadn't written a story since leaving college. But the motivation to try and address that problem made me try. And when I started writing, I realized I really love this. I'm really enjoying trying to build out these characters and trying to write these scenes out. And so again, I prioritized the time. So I was getting up at the time at about 4:30 in the morning, and really excited to sit down and go bang out on this really loud keyboard that my wife at the time was getting really annoyed with. And I had no idea that I was going to love that process so much, and I wouldn't have if I hadn't been moved to try and address that problem. So again, I knew the problem, right? Like, my daughter Huhana is going to have a harder time than some of her classmates. So I can try and do something to address that. I tried to do it, and I loved the process of writing, and so I kept doing it. And I'm still writing, so I'm doing these short stories at the moment, which I'm really, really loving doing as well. I really love that process. And rapping for me is the same thing. Like, it's a very similar process for me and a similar purpose. I'm just trying to address that problem in a different way than via writing, the medium of writing. I talked about learning Te Reo Māori at the moment. So again, that problem that I've already talked about, knowing that people in low socioeconomic situations face problems that many of them can't face challenges that many of them can't overcome on their own, and knowing that a big portion of Māori live in that demographic. I believe that me speaking my own language might make it easier for me to address some of that problem with my own people, and go back into my community and go back and give in a way that's useful. So that motivated me to try and start learning, and to step into that into the shoes of that enigma that I'd always kind of stared in wonder at, and a little bit of amusement at uni of an adult student. Like, it's hard to be an adult learner. My daughter and my son remind me of that every time I try to throw them a new word, a new Māori word, and they pick it up in about a fifth of the time that it's taken me to pick it up. But again, being motivated enough to try and be a learner, I realized that I really love the process of learning a new language. I'd never done it before. I kind of geek out on analysing those words and thinking about where they came from, and then just the whole connection to my ancestors, to my tupuna, that the language has been given me, making me feel connected to this bigger thing, the world, the Māori world, Te Ao Māori, and the Māori kind of thought process, which the language is a big part of, because the language is very metaphorical and it's very environmental, and it's linked to the way Māori lived back when the language was formed, right, which was as one with the environment. And I want my children to feel that connection as well. It's kind of a side issue, but that, I believe, is a really big mental health tool and a lever that we should be pulling more of, that connectedness to a bigger thing, being the language, and being identity as Māori is a really powerful tool. But again, I would have never known that I would love that process so much and be so motivated to prioritize the time to do it. I have night classes every week for a few hours, and then we have whole day wānanga or meetings, and a bunch of time that I spend on it throughout the week. I would have never known that I love it enough to prioritize the little bit of time that I have if I hadn't tried it. And I would have never tried it if I hadn't known and felt motivated by that problem. The learning Te Reo Māori isn't just about me and feeling like I can speak the language of my people. That's an important part of it, but the problem is actually much bigger than that. And I feel like that's what I'm addressing, and that motivated me to try it. My day job at BNZ is actually kind of the same. Like I'm a digital product owner at the moment. I've been at the bank for 15 years, and I've had 10 jobs in that 15 years. And every single time I've changed jobs, it's because I've seen a problem that looked interesting to try and solve somewhere else. So I've started this role, and I've been in a role, and I've gone, oh man, that problem over there looks quite interesting. I wonder if there's a way for me to test that hypothesis. I wonder if there's a way for me to try and get closer to that problem and work on it a little bit. And so I've done literally that every time I've changed jobs. So the most recent one, moving from I was a digital people leader, and then I, as part of we do these innovation days where we try and solve, we throw out problems that we think are worth trying to solve, and try and work on them. And mine was putting Te Reo Māori into into internet banking and into the mobile apps. And we kind of pitched that, and we got it across the line, I guess to say. And so then there was this kind of part-time role that was available to step in and be the product owner for that, getting that piece of work off the ground while I was still doing my other job. So I tested that hypothesis and found that, I love working this much closer with the team that I'd kind of been working with on a different level, and love getting into these problems with them. And I've done that with every job that I've had. So I guess the summary of I know a lot of you are probably much better at drawing these attempts at whatever they are, sketches, than me, but I was just trying to really outline how I've got each piece of work that I've loved doing, which make me love my life. So it's always been the same. I've always known the problem. I've been motivated by the purpose of trying to address it enough to just give something a try. And when I've tried it, I've found that I've loved the process enough to prioritize the time. So I get up at about 4:45 at the moment, and I spend an hour doing music or writing. So either rapping or writing, and then I spend an hour, depending on the day, on one of those things that I talked about that I do. So either the shoebox Christmas work, podcast, board work, company work, or my Te Reo Māori learning. And that's why I love my life. Like, I spend every single every single hour that I have of those 16 doing things that I've tested the hypothesis of if I'm going to love, and found that I do love it. And so that motivates me to prioritize the time. There's a bunch of things that I've tried which I haven't loved, and that I've then gone, cool, go back to another way to try and address that problem. I tried being a graphic designer. I've been a kayak guide, a music producer, tried setting up an e-commerce store, a bunch of other things that I didn't love the process of it. While I was still trying to address the same problem, I didn't enjoy the actual mechanics of that work. So I stopped doing it, because understanding the problem and understanding the purpose means I know the opportunity cost of that time in that hour. So if I'm not enjoying it, then I know I'm not solving that initial problem of loving the time that I'm here, because I know how finite it is. And my timer just went off for 20 minutes, but that can't be right. 15, I don't know, maybe it is. So I guess the process there is what I've gone through. I mean, I've loved my life ever since I started deprioritizing things and not spending time on things that I didn't love, which is a pretty simplistic and pretty obvious formula. So sorry it's taken so long to explain, but that's kind of, I guess, me moving through that formula with the biggest rocks that I spend my time on. And I guess if I have one hope, like I said, this isn't a self-help talk thing, but it would just be that you think about that problem of loving your life more, because I think we can all do it a little bit more, but it just takes some quite intentional prioritization and deprioritization of those things that actually that's taking up a valuable hour that you could be spending doing something that you actually love. Because there's a whole bunch of things that we just kind of do on autopilot without even thinking about the opportunity cost. But every single one of those hours, the opportunity cost is an hour that you love. And I might just stop there in case there's any Q&A. Or Q, maybe not any A, I don't know.
So I put a question in the chat. I'm wondering what you would suggest or advice you might give for someone who doesn't know the problem.
Who doesn't know the problem? Yeah, I mean, I guess the like there are a lot of problems, right? Like and I guess for me, that overarching one of like, I need to love my life intentionally and as much as I can, only became obvious to me as a problem because I realized what would happen if I didn't. But that possibility is true for everybody, right? Like we all, I mean, mental health is an issue, and for anybody and everybody. Like it just so happens that Māori especially, and so people that I feel especially, that I care especially about, have a higher risk of it than other groups, but everybody is at risk of that. So everybody could do with addressing that problem of how do I love my life as much as possible? Because, in 20 years or in 20 days, it could be gone. And none of us know when it's going to go, but obviously it's going to end. So I would say that problem is always there. And then if that's not enough, and if you want to find another problem that motivates you to try something, just look around. Like there's so much stuff out there that we can do better on as a race, as a species, that, I would urge you to just have a look around. And I don't know, maybe I should put a page on my website with here's some of the other problems that I found that I don't have time to address. Thanks, Emma. I'm glad it wasn't as rambly as it felt.
Not at all.
First line. Is it just opposite?
No, it was really inspirational, Petra. It's really nice to hear stories from people's hearts. I've been kind of quietly stalking you a bit on LinkedIn too, and everything I read just inspires me so much. So thank you.
Cool. Thank you. I wish the first slide which talked about equality, about which we often.
I can speak, Petra. I'm talking about the very first slide, which talks about equality, and we often take it as a very, giving equal opportunity to everybody is the right thing, but often it creates homogeneous society and opposite to heterogeneous workforce of society. So I'm really liking that slide where equality doesn't often work for everybody. So you want to talk more on that slide?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I kind of really just put that in there as a, like I really like a lot of the thinking or a lot of the talking at least that people are doing at the moment around trying to create an understanding that like it's really just about not everybody starting on an even playing field, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean, oh look, like it means addressing the fact that just because you all have the same opportunity, or we all have, that door is open to all of us, just go through it, like, just like I did. Just trying to think back and realize that, like, actually my dad never taught me about doors. Like my dad didn't teach me to walk. Like there's a huge difference between someone who who understands what opportunities are and understands that they have the capability to take advantage of those opportunities or utilize those opportunities, and somebody who actually all of my role models were, none of the people that I look up to and think of as examples of what I could be ever walked through that door. That like you're starting from a completely different place. Yeah, that's kind of more of what I was trying to very quickly summarize in a flashing glimpse of a picture in a in a presentation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
There, time for one more question.
Thanks, Pera. Just being cautious of the time, can we have the other questions on the meetup page, please?
Cool.
And then, Pera, you can answer on the meetup page.
There might be time at the end of mine. Mine's very short.
Cool.
If we don't get through them, Pera, what we've been asking others to do, if possible, and if they agree to it, is to put some answers on the meetup page, because that would be fabulous.
For sure.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Pera.
Cool. Thanks, team.
It was a quite heart-touching and inspiring story. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Moving on to the next one, we have Diana Mine. Diana, I did learn how to pronounce your last name, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right. It's Mine. And she'll be speaking on how to agile people that don't want to be agile. A little bit about, sorry?
I am definitely going to speak about that. It's hard to follow that though, man, goodness me. I just want to sit here for the next 10 minutes going like this. Like, I feel like we need 2 minutes just to process that, but maybe it's just me.
Yeah, I'll give a little bit of intro on your topic so that you get 2 minutes to process it. We'll go through some practical ways to help ease organizations and teams into agile practices without scaring the shit out of them with our agile jazz hands. Great for people who are coaching teams or organizations who are new to agile projects or who have been told they must learn agile or else a pause, or have asked to learn but really don't want to change. So that's about the topic. Little bit about Diana. Diana is the COO at JRNY, Chief Operating Officer, an insurtech startup using their conversational platform and machine learning tech to improve the customer experience of insurance. Previously, as head of delivery at TradeMe, she focused on optimizing lean and agile practices for over 50 teams across 3 offices with her trusty team of delivery coaches. As an agile practitioner since 2008, she focused on modern agile values, pragmatic operational design, increasing psychological safety for better teamwork, and blurring the lines of product delivery and UX. That's about Diana.
Thank you.
Over to you, Diana. I hope you have got time now.
It sounds great when it comes out of your mouth when you say it, so thank you.
Thank you.
I sound so good. Sorry. Wow, okay, so taking it down a notch from that. I'll share my screen shortly, but yeah, we're going to talk about a more specific topic, let's say. Let me just share my screen, hang on. Right, let's see if I can see everyone still. Right, can you see my screen? Is it blue?
Yep.
Yes.
Good. Awesome. Okay, so my camera is here, but my slide set's here, so I'm going to be glancing in this direction as well. So, oh, I better start my button. Cool. Right, so a bit of a tongue-in-cheek intro to how to agile people who don't really want to be agiled. And we'll go into some specifics around what I consider those scenarios might be. I've been in each of those scenarios before. So let's just crack into it. Let me see if I can make this work from the screen. There we go. Right. So firstly, the question is, should we actually agile people who don't want to be agiled? And I'm pleased Emma's here, because Emma was the very first person who says, but what about consent, when I said what my topic might be. Yay, Emma, thank you. You're always keeping me, above board. And I don't remember quite what my answer was to you, but like, screw consent. No, I said, yes, I much prefer being in a situation where people are consenting to learn something new and have been invited into doing that. And that there's a need for that, for those practices as well. or that someone's just in the sheer frustration of things and they just really want to learn the new practices, right? But how did we get here? Where are we in a situation that we're often dealing with a situation where they actually don't want what you've got? Why are you even there in the first place? And what do we do if we are? Hands up, I can generally see people's hands. Hands up who's been in one of those situations before. Just so I'm going to put like all my hands up so many times. Cool. So it's not an unusual situation, and often that's where we get introduced to the picture. The picture is that. So I've put 4 scenarios that I think are quite common and that I've been in, and we'll talk a bit about those as we go. And then I've got 5 kind of pro tips, I would call it, as to how I address those in each of those situations. So one, which is probably a quite common situation, that, and probably the least harmful of those situations, is when you've been working in an organization and you're quite an agile organization, but you're a vendor to an organization that isn't that agile or hasn't been working in that way. And so often you're trying to work together and you've got misaligned practices. So that's probably common, I would say. And I spent many years of my life as a vendor to a lot of organizations, government as well, who were not in that camp. And it was like starting from scratch every time with every project. So we'll talk a bit about that. Scenario B is working with internal teams. Often you get, I'm going to say, given a team, foisted a team, we'll even say, foisted. Here's a team that you need to agile, jazz hands over to make better. So that they've been either told they need to be agile, or my favorite is DevOps that team. It's like my eyes can't roll back far enough when I hear those things. So, but there's usually something going on there, but you've just been gifted this glorious team who doesn't want to actually be in the situation that you're there with. A third scenario is, and many of you are possibly in transformation programs as we speak. Sometimes you're consulting in a large program of work that's about transformational change, and you've been brought in as the agile expert because agile is the panacea for all transformations. That's often how we start. So that's another scenario. But my least favorite, and one that is quite common, when you're in an organization, either that's your organization or you're working within one in some ways, that they're really playing lip service at a cultural level to the practices. This is, I think, the most damaging and unhealthy, but often you're there because you're helping support the narrative that that organization is a very innovative, agile, great practices all about the people, but underlying that, it's really not true at a climate level. So does that all make sense, those scenarios? Nodding, hopefully I can see nodding. Yeah, okay, so those are 4 scenarios that I find commonly that you're trying to do your best work in under what I would call scenarios that aren't optimized for teaching great practices. Cool, so my first question though to you all is, do you remember how you were introduced to agile practices? And did you want to be doing that? Some, absolutely yes. Some had a sniff of an idea of what that might be. Some hated it and now love it. Some had a bad experience with it, found someone who could teach them better, and off we went, right? So there's a lot of ways that people are introduced to these practices. We're now quite a few years down the road of agile practices being embedded in people's lives, and the people who are often learning about those practices now are really in the other side of the bell curve often, or are new to this type of work somehow. So we are really in the laggards, I feel, a little bit. Doesn't mean that there's any harm in being that, but it's a harder equation to work with. It's not like you're in those really early leading ones who are just jumping at the chance. You may find some who are, but I think it's very important to understand what you're going into when you're invited into these scenarios, because it's not going to be all lovely. It's not going to be all like, welcome, I'm like, you know, bring your Agile toolkit with you, and off we go in a lot of ways. It doesn't mean it's not valuable, and we can talk about that as we go. But I think keeping in mind how, if you were in their position, you'd like to understand how this might work for them is going to be really important. So my first pro tip is, and I think people who've worked with me before, I say this quite a lot, is it's not about you, it's about them. And starting where they are is more important than smearing them with a thin film of Agile practices immediately upon meeting them. So starting where they are is very important. Going in and actually validating them as people, and really helping them understand that you're there to be supportive of them, not to try and change them or fix them, or something was wrong. People don't like to feel that they were wrong. And so if you think about those scenarios more around, like scenario B, when you're working with a team that they're saying, Agile this team, they're usually there because something has been perceived to be inefficient about them, not working as team, or they're not getting the results or that someone's expecting somewhere in their organization. Same with the kind of cultural lip service side of things. So I think understanding that what they've done to date has had value, and you're not there to try and poop all over it. You're trying to work out what they're doing right now, and validating that they're not mad and they have been doing good things, but there's even better things that you can do as well. So I like to think of it a bit like when you're doing debating. You don't have two sides that immediately start at polar opposite ends and start arguing. You tend to start with two arguments, and you start in the middle and say, I think we can all agree that blah 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 is typically the way you start, and then you start easing them away from that argument and convincing them otherwise. This is how I would like to approach these situations, is that we start at a common ground and move them in that direction. And I think finding out what they use already that you just either don't mind if they can continue to do is a really good start. People often think you're going to go in there and rip everything they're doing out and replace it with something they know nothing about. So I like to use what they've got and then put a bit of an Agile spin on it. So an example is, this is something that I did recently, is I love the Inception deck, for instance, love it. But if you're going into an organization with a first project or a first introduction to this and you're about to kick off, I never present the Inception deck because it's full of language that is absolutely foreign. Often it's in a format that it feels like a game. There's a lot about the Inception deck that can just be absolutely scary. We don't realize that now because we've been using it so often. It's like, it's just the Inception deck and it's just the way we do it. So that's a good example. I often take the Inception deck, and if I'm dealing with a particularly bureaucratic organization, I will turn that into an agenda. They love agendas. And the agenda is written like an agenda, and the details within that agenda satisfies that Inception deck. You see what I mean? So we start with what they know, and we apply a thin layer of what we are trying to teach them. So equally, starting out with a welcome to kicking off that meeting, and we want to set up an 8-hour workshop to go through that Inception deck, might not be the best introduction to Agile practices. So I like to start out with the agenda being a 1-hour agenda, and we run through short first pass of all those and create another meeting to do more detailed things. Most organizations who are not used to Agile practices are pretty comfortable with that. That's how they operate, right? So again, start where they are, not because you're a specialist in what and you think you're in there to try and convert them. Okay, so this is where I like to start. There's a few different examples there, but like, for instance, there are many things that can exist quite happily without you just ripping it out. And be very careful about how much you do when you first meet those new potential, or those new customers, or the people who you're actually trying to teach, because you can scare them and you can get a really bad outcome. They can run away from you and start, you can never really teach people after that. So that's where I like to start. That's my first pro tip. Whew. Never let your enthusiasm for things, and we are very enthusiastic about these practices, I will tell us. Never brush off things that have been really giving them safety, because I've done it in the past too, and I've learned my lesson. Things like risk management and change management, they actually are important and have been important in a lot of these organizations, especially bigger organizations. And I remember the first time I met, I'm not going to say which one, but one of the original authors of the Agile Manifesto, and I was relatively new to Agile practices, and I remember saying, how do you address risk outside of sprints? Like, I get that sprints help to manage risk and that we should prioritize risky things first, but how do you manage other risks? And he said, you just don't know what you're doing. You don't know anything about Agile practices, because if you did, you wouldn't be asking me that question. And I was devastated about that, to be honest. I was really like, oh God, I'm really not very Agile. And I was burned by that, right? Because I still had the problem. My customers were still saying, where's the rest of the risk management? Where's all this other stuff that we need? And just telling me to, you're not doing it right is not useful. So I think addressing those pragmatically, things like change management, project plans. I hate Gantt charts. I think a lot of us do. But if someone wants to manage their Gantt chart, let them fill their boots with those fun Gantt charts. If it doesn't impact what you're trying to do, and they're not tying you to those particular things, but they're ticking whatever into a box, at least initially, over time, you can very clearly show them how that's not necessarily needed. But right off the bat, saying we don't do project planning just scares people. Of course they do. Of course that would be scary for them. Same with language like OKRs versus KPIs. These things are not necessarily wrong in and of themselves, and they're very similar, but we can ease them into it. Some people say, but I don't want to compromise my own skill set and my own tool set while I'm there to be doing my best work. This isn't my best work. I'm compromising that. I find that probably the next one, this one is probably the most, I get that. I get where the ideal we should always be working it is. But in reality, I think I've only managed to work in that ideal once in my life, where it was actually fully all singing or dancing, great Agile practices that everyone did their best work in. And it's not often you can get that. You're somewhere on that curve of awesomeness. So don't be the one to die on the Agile hill. Like, is this thing and right in front of you that you're fighting, trying to get across, oh, I'll just give them more information, oh, they just don't understand, I'll give them more workshops on Agile practices, whatever it might be. Is it really where you need to be putting your effort in? Using your common sense, especially for longer term relationships that you're going to have over time, being much more outcome focused is better. It's chipping away at it is often better than trying to push something that just, it defeats the whole purpose of what those practices are supposed to enable. Don't be so stuck on on the fact that we're not doing it like we're supposed to. And what are we supposed to be doing anyway? There's some very simple rules at the top of this, or principles that we work with, and everything else is pretty flexible. So be flexible and show that you're there to support them as people and them doing their best work, rather than you're not doing the process right, you're not getting it, you know, I've measured, you're not measuring your cycle time properly. Goodness me, the amount of arguments we can all have about the things that we will do and don't do well is a lot. So choose the battles you're going to fight carefully, because you've only got so much time and so much influence to get these people to really see that this is going to be a benefit for them. Another one that we all know, and we use just generally because Agile practices support that, is the fastest way I've ever found to convince anyone of doing it is to show them that it works. So taking something that is small and usually difficult for them, in that first window of opportunity you have with them, whether it's like, again, you know, those kickoff meetings that are done that are not usually in Agile practices, it's usually quite time consuming and difficult to wrangle. And you can show them, oh, look, we'll just have this 1 hour meeting and it'll be much easier and we'll get these results. You know, you can really chip away. It's really small things in that first part that can show them that, oh, it's not so scary, it's not so new, it's not so different. That means that they'll take on more and more of that. So choosing anything that you can demonstrate that what they did was good, but what they're doing now is better than that, and they didn't lose any credibility, or they didn't feel like they hadn't done that on their own with their own right. That's the most important thing to be looking for right off the bat. In that first few weeks, you need to be helping them get a really quick win. And then repeat that often. Eventually, they're going to be more agile than not. And suddenly you go, hey, did you realize that you're quite agile right now? And they're like, no. Yeah. So I think this one is quick wins. Quick wins is the thing that wins us every day. The other probably key thing is, why have you really been bought in? If you understand this part before you begin, you're really a little bit closer to the truth of it. In all of those scenarios, for instance, I remember working as a vendor and being brought in to try and show up their internal IT team, who'd given an estimate of 2 years and been told to do something in 2 weeks, to try and give them a kick up the butt. So, you know, so there's reasons you've been brought in. Equally, what I found is the teams that you've been given to be agiled often are really good, but someone else is looking at them like, you're not doing it fast enough, better enough, whatever. But once you actually get under the surface there, they're actually finding there's a process around them that's actually not working. So why are you really there? That will actually direct where you need to go next, but you're never there to actually just agile people. Never, never. And equally, the same thing is, like, don't expect to have everyone be keen to have you be successful at what you're trying to do. There's a lot of people who've created their own fiefdoms in the scenario that you're coming into, and they're happy with how tightly that's held. They've got a lot of control of that. And equally, if you are successful, don't necessarily think that you're going to be able to take any credit for that. I've had customers over the years, you know, years later, tell me the story about how well they did it. And it's like, oh, that's right, that was me when I was there. So, you know, but they're happily telling whatever story they want. And to me, it doesn't matter, because I think the outcome is more important than who gets credit for those outcomes. So, but I think understanding the actually underlying reason why you've been invited in the first place, or at least being told to go and deal with that situation, is vital to working out how you can work with those people and still get a really good outcome. Because I do believe you can. It's not a pushing shit uphill kind of scenario. I do believe you can actually get the best scenarios often in these ones. But ultimately, is it worth it? I think yes. I think it is worth it. Even if you're starting out with a really bad situation, you've been brought in to do something magical with your special unicorn powers, and it's just not possible because of the circumstance. But you can influence people. You can really get some really good wins on the table for those people and unpick some of those threads that really enable them to do other good work. My favorite is when years later, someone will come back to you like, oh, I remember you worked with me and I learned this. And from there, I went here, here, and here. And, 5 years down the track, you've actually made a really huge difference and you didn't even know at the time. So it's not something that you feel really stoked with. Look how I've optimized this crew often in these circumstances. But it's like, I moved it forward more than anyone else would if I wasn't there. I've taught some people some really good things. Those people are humans who need help in those circumstances. And I've done that. I've done the best I can. That is actually really useful and very valuable work to be done. So I feel you if you are in that situation. I do feel it because I've been in it more often than not. But I do believe you're doing really excellent work in those situations, and we should try harder in those situations, because agiling someone who wants to be agile, that's easy. Not agiling people who don't want to be agile is not. So yeah, that's me. Let's ask some questions and let's have a chat. Feel free to just blurt them out. How's that? I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Diana. I don't see any questions in the chat though.
Easy. That's it. That's easy if there aren't any questions.
Cool. Thanks for that wonderful talk. Thanks, Diana.
No worries.
Since there are no questions in the chat as well, we'll move on. The next speaker we have, and the last one, is CD Doyle, who will be speaking on quality debt. Little bit about the topic. As a customer, it always seems that the products and services that you initially bought because they were just what you needed often seems to become cumbersome, hard to use, or just don't work anymore. So why is that? And that's what CD is going to explain. As a PO, product owner, it's easy to be responsive and deliver a quality product when it's greenfields or a prototype, but frequently it just seems to get harder over time to do what you used to do easily. Part of the professional product ownership beyond the basic series, this CD will be giving a talk which will help us understand why this happens and give you some thinking to work out what to do about it. A little bit about CD. She works with Agile Collab and is a well-known Agile coach and trainer around Wellington with a passion for helping people make the most out of this Agile thing. After working with everyone from large banks to small startups over the last 10 years, CD has the war stories and strives to know what's going to work in your environment. In her spare time, she likes to cook fiery food, play board games, and grow anything that's edible. How was that, CD?
Perfect, thanks, Tejas.
Over to you, CD.
I didn't
Thank
expect
you.
it to be read out word for word.
Yeah.
Sounds, as Diana said, it sounds very different when you hear it read out. That's kind of cool.
Over to you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tejas. So I thought because this, and thank you, Diana. Some good points there. I've written them all down. So yay. So because this is a Matariki special event, I thought I'd start with a bit of this. So kia ora tātou, ko kaukau te maunga, ko te whanganuiatara te awa, no te whanganuiatara ahau, ko Doyle tōko whānau, ko CD taku ingoa, kia ora. So quality debt. It's a concept I kind of developed from working with product owners, and particularly in working out what I needed to talk to product owners about when I was looking at how do I go beyond the basics of Agile fundamentals and give them, what's the next level to be thinking about. So I'm going to sort of talk you through it, and I'm really interested in your thoughts about whether it resonates, whether you think it'd be useful, whether it's something you've come across or not, entirely not, and something I'm completely blowing smoke about. So first of all, you get to do something now. So I want you to, we're going to think about those two words, so quality and debt. So first up, quality. I want you to think about a time where you've had a great experience. It might have been going out to do something, where you've had a great, you've had it's been a service that you've used, or something, some kind of, you know, what was it what would you say were the attributes of that service or that experience that you had that made it quality, right? What gave it the attribute of being a quality experience? So if you have some ideas, I'll give you a second to think about it. So thinking about that awesome experience or service that you used. And then if you put in the chat maybe one or two things that you think made it a quality experience. Welcoming, easy to use, you felt connected with, nice, okay. Personal, friendly. Yeah, exactly. So now think of a service, or you know, maybe it's an app or a professional service, something that you bought or you subscribed to because you thought, this is amazing, this really works, it does what I need it to do. But you found over time it actually kind of stopped being what you needed and stopped doing what you were trying to do, and eventually you kind of just gave up on it, or it might still be around but you don't use it very much. So think of something that's like that. So I'm not going to ask you to going to a gym. Yeah, nice. I'm not going to. I was going to ask you to dob people in, but just sort of have that in mind as we go through this talk. And third and last question, I'm going to think about debt now. Is debt always a bad thing? Yes or no? And you can vote in the chat. Yes or no? No, not always. Okay. So what kind of example might you have of a time where you purposefully go to debt? You choose to do that. Oh, and I've lost the chat. Okay. That's interesting. Okay, there we go. Got it. Okay. Yeah, a mortgage, exactly. Right. Perfect. So a house is a good example. So we're building a house, or buying a house, and that house has a value, and we hope that over time that value will increase. So obviously it will go, you know, wiggly up and down, but eventually, you know, it ends up being worth more than when we bought it. We go into debt, we take a loan, which hopefully is less than the value of the property itself, and we reduce that loan over time, and eventually we get to a situation where we have, you know, a lot of value and no debt. Fantastic. So that can take, you know, 20 years, sometimes 30. I recommend going for 15. Pay it off as quickly as you can. Now, for the kind of things that we do day to day, services in particular, we have a slightly different situation. So when we start, a product has a life cycle, and it starts with not being worth a lot of value, and over time increases and sort of has a steep curve, and then over time it kind of flattens off, and eventually the product will actually, you know, reach a decline, and we'll probably replace it with something else. When it comes to debt, and I'm talking about a debt I'm calling quality debt. When we start something, we don't have any quality debt, but the natural order of things means that the world changes, life moves on, and the way that we built something doesn't stay the best way to do something. And the quality of the thing that we built in the first place needs to evolve and change. But because as time goes on and the natural entropy of the world happens, we end up, even with the best will in the world, the processes and the business way of doing things tends to solidify, and it becomes harder and harder to change those things. And anyone who's worked in a big organization knows this. So we get to a point where it's very difficult to change things, and we have more hassle and difficulty in changing something because of the quality debt that we've incurred than there is in making the changes to the product or the service that we have, that we're offering. So this can actually happen in as little as 3 years. In the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, which was written way back in 1997, the guy called Clayton Christensen, who's a Harvard professor, did some research and found that this situation here, where it's really hard for us to change things, to innovate, to incorporate the learning that we've got over time, can take as little as 3 years. So what can we do about it? Well, luckily, there is a virtuous circle here. The thing to do is to start small and to start with something. So knowing that you're where you are in this situation is a good start, but you might not know that to start with. So think about what quality is for you and do something to fix your quality debt, even something small. If you do that, the overall quality of your product or your service, your business process, the way that you're attacking things will get better. That will mean that there will be less errors, less complaints, less incidents, less problems. And if you have less problems taking you away from your ability to innovate and to try new things and to build in your learning, then you have more time. And you can spend that time putting some more time into fixing your quality debt. Conversely, of course, if you don't spend any time fixing your quality debt, your quality degrades. It just does that anyway. Even with, as I say, with the best will in the world, we are living in a world that has just a natural inclination towards entropy. So your problems increase over time, and that reduces the amount of time that you can spend on anything, let alone fixing quality debt. And this is the vicious circle going in the other way. So, as a concept, as a product owner, you need to be thinking about how do you do this and where do you start? Well, the action that you take is actually just the tip of the iceberg. In order to know what kind of action to take, what kind of option to choose, you actually need a lot of information, a lot of data about the quality attributes in your business process or your service that you're offering. In order to have that, there's actually a lot, as with an iceberg, a lot of stuff under the waters, under the covers, that you need to do in terms of monitoring, in knowing how your business process is working and performing. How is your service rating in terms of how does the thing operate? Do you know when it's going out of bounds in terms of the quality attributes that you want? And in this situation, I actually think of things like hotels. The top hotels in the world have absolutely huge amount of monitoring. They know exactly how everything is working in their organization, and they can tell very quickly if something is going out of bounds. So they have the data and they can take action really quickly on the service that they're offering to their customers. So this is something that, as I put together from thinking about product ownership and how product owners work, and the kind of things they need to be thinking about in addition to the basic standard stuff, particularly for non-IT products, so services and offerings, experiences that you're trying to give to your customer. So that is my talk and my thought, and I'm interested in how that sits with people. What do you think? What have you found? I'll stop sharing for a minute. I can see you. Does it resonate with people? Or not?
It does, Sidhi, for sure. Thanks for that wonderful talk.
I really like the fantastic way it was relayed differently to try and help people understand it. So very similar to some of the stuff that Diana was saying. You know, it's like, don't just throw all this stuff at them, but what's another way in which we can help people be okay with it? So yeah, it was very cool. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Phil.
I don't see any further questions on the chat, but we can still open up the floor for questions if anybody wants to ask to Sidhi. Well, silence is golden then.
I had a question to Sidhi.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with her tech setup there, and I wanted to know how many cameras she had going on, because it's really simple, but it was really effective for us to be part of the experience, and I'm curious to know what you were doing.
Thanks. Yeah, so I've got two cameras. So there's the one on the laptop, which is the one that's looking at me, and I've got a webcam attached as well, and that's looking at the table. So what I have been doing up until just today, so I found a new tool, is I normally dial in with two cameras. So one is on me, and I dial in again to the Zoom meeting with a second camera. What I discovered, and then you can flip between the two, obviously. You get people to pin the one that you want pinned. But what I discovered today is, I don't know how long it's been in Zoom, but when you share screen, you have an option to go to the advanced tab, and you can pick a second camera. So I'll just do it again so you can see here. And I've actually got three cameras. There's a third one which is not operating at the moment. So when I click switch camera, it will rotate between the three cameras. So you can see that should have flipped things around. And then there's a blank one, which is the dead one. And then back to this one. So yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Oh.
And Shane, I now have 10 minutes of me doing something innovative and presenting remotely. So I hope that's enough to pass.
That will definitely work for the teacher piece.
I know what that one's about too.
Oh, this is my guest star, by the way, Cynthia.
So can Sidhi and Diana please share your slides? Share the link to your slides.
I'll send you a photo. This is a physical piece of paper. So yeah, absolutely.
Take a photo, Sidhi.
It would be excellent to get your slides if you were willing.
I'll put them in the meetup channel, eh?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end. Thanks to all the speakers and thanks to the participants. Please feel free to stay back if you want to socialize. I'll stop the recording. and then you can speak whatever you want to.